One other thing I thought that we'd touch upon when we start to talk about prevention and mitigation is the sort of the tentacles of your organization beyond your four corners, to the extent anybody has four walls anymore. But who you're sharing data with, who has access to your systems, and sort of the importance of having a third party service provider due diligence system in place, not just contracting with any organization that looks great. Sort of what are the key items that we need to be asking those organizations, looking into about their cybersecurity policy and safeguards? Any tips there?
Absolutely. So I think first and foremost is who are you doing business with? Understanding your vendors that you have out there, and then do they have access to your systems? So we normally walk through our clients, kind of what we call a grid matrix of asking that question first. Then the second one is, what information do you trade with them, and how's that information stored? Are they pulling information directly from you? Are they sending you certain types of reports? Is that information coming in through email, through SFTP? Is it electronically? And then where does it get stored? How does it flow through your records retention policy? And then how do we eventually get rid of that information? If you can understand the vendor risk management side of the house, again, you kind of control that risk aspect of it. I say that because, sometimes you'll allow vendors to use your VPN and they might not have multi-factor authentication. Well, if the vendor gets compromised and those credentials get compromised, then potentially you might be at risk. If you have a managed service provider that is looking at your network, does each person have their own username or credential, or do they use a generic one? Time and time again, when we have unauthorized access, we see the generic one being used. So again, preventative maintenance. How do vendors log in? What credentials do they use? Are they signed individually, or is it just a generic one? Understanding that. I think some other things, again, from a vendor perspective, would be once you send them data, how do they store it? What are their procedures that they're using? How do they eventually get rid of it? Things of that nature. And where are you on the pecking order with the vendor? I say that because if you are dealing with a particular vendor and you are a kind of what we call a silver client, as opposed to, let's just say they have silver, gold, platinum, titanium. Your level of service isn't going to be that great as opposed to a diamond client. So we all want to be treated like a diamond. And I think with that, we just need to build those contractual obligations into our contracts and enforce those contractual obligations. You can do vendor audits. We always encourage people to put that in their contracts so you can go out and request certain items. It's a contractual item that, yes, you can do that. So you have some teeth that you could ask. Do you have a SAS 70? Do you have an ISO 2702? These are all different types of certifications. And if you do, we'd like to see that information. Again, it's about protecting yourself. There's so many contracts that were created years ago that don't have that teeth in them because, again, remember, we trust everybody. Until you have an incident, then we don't trust you anymore. It's just like, oh, get away. And then you have to go through that process of, regaining the trust again. And there's so many clients, especially in ransomware events that we go through this with, that we're able to recover the systems. We're able to get them up in a timely manner, but yet the third-party vendors are like, nah, we need some more time. We need to figure out, can we trust you again? It's like, we've been doing business with you for 10 years. Now you're going to put this form in front of us, or we're going to update the contract, or we're going to do multiple different things. Those are things from the vendor perspective that you've really got to be cognizant of. Back to phishing emails and preventative maintenance. How often do your vendors actually change their banking information? A lot of times, for us as individuals, I can tell you, and I probably should do this, I've had the same bank account now for about 25 years. It's the same one. I don't go out and change it all the time. Multiple vendors, you have one bank account. It's kind of the same thing. So, if you receive an email from the vendor going, oh, by the way, for this payment, you should send it to X, that's kind of a red flag of, hey, maybe I should pick up the phone here. Something's not right. So, if you kind of think through those aspects from a vendor perspective and risk rank your vendors, you can actually save yourself a lot of heartache. I say risk rank your vendors because there's vendors that you've been using for quite some time. There's ones that are new ones, but there's also ones that you use from a frequency perspective. So you got to be cognizant if that vendor were to go out of business, who's the backup? You don't want to get in the tricky situation of the vendor gets compromised and you're reliant on them. And that's what we kind of call supply chain attacks. So from a preventative maintenance perspective, you have to figure out, am I solely dependent on this one vendor to provide me X? And if I am and they go down, then what do I do? We see, especially in this day and age, a lot of supply chain attacks to where you haven't been impacted, but your vendor has, and therefore you can't make the product that's needed or you can't do the services that are needed without that certain vendor. Case in point, last year, there was a large tax services organization that provides tax accounting software to multiple different CPAs that are out there. They were reliant on the vendor, cloud-based solution. It went offline for about 7 days. So you had a lot of CPAs that are sitting out there going, well, I can't file your tax return because I'm reliant on the vendor to provide that software. And then you know, that's a risk management point. If something were to happen, what's the backup plan? Is there a different way that we can do things? Or are we dead in the water? And a lot of organizations are actually dead in the water. From a CRA perspective, we just handled a very large cloud services provider that provided information to dental organizations. So throughout the United States, we had hundreds of dentists that couldn't perform their operations because the software was down. You know, so if I'm in that industry and I'm providing dental services to my clients, the question is, what's the backup plan? You always have to have a backup plan. And if you don't have one, those are things preventative wise to start thinking through, because if something were to go down, you know, how do I make sure that I continue operations going?
Absolutely. I think those contracts are one of the largest things that we keep talking about. In addition to that, in terms of third-party organizations and third-party vendor attacks and things along the lines of that nature, that has probably been one of the single largest upticks, and in addition to ransomware, within the past year or so, right? And certainly something to be thinking about from the legal perspective is, you know, what is their obligation to you? So, for instance, you need to be asking yourself, if I give my data as a company, do I give my data to somebody else, right? A software provider or a third party? What's the obligation? It's your data. It's your data. It's your obligation to notify the individuals in the event that they have an incident on their end and the data is impacted on the third party end. It is still your obligation to notify the individuals if it's your data, if you're the data owner. So then the question becomes, take a look at your contracts and say, what's their obligation to me in the event of an incident? Do they have cyber coverage, right? Are they going to be notifying the individuals? If they hold my data, are they going to be notifying the individuals in the event of an incident? What about if I'm arguing on the terms of the contract? What about the jurisdictional clauses associated with it? What about the indemnification clauses? What if somebody, in the event of an incident on a third party, and they're doing the notifications on your behalf and you have to notify individuals? What if an individual comes after your company? What are their obligations to you? These are all things to be building into the contract from an initial standpoint. And a lot of the times, by the way, when an incident occurs, you want to think to yourself, okay, well, what about from a forensic standpoint? Is my data, is my company at issue as a result? Do I have a linked system? Is it written into the contract that they will provide you detailed understanding of what occurred? Are they going to provide you the forensic report? Very rarely does that occur, where they provide the forensic report in those instances. But especially if you're a regulated organization, you might be asked from the regulator's standpoint for it. So certainly something to be building into your contract and to be thinking about from that initial standpoint. Do they have into the contract that in the event that they are down, how many days are they down before your company is reimbursed? Like, we're talking about the supply chain, Bill had talked about the supply chain attacks. It's very, very common. Like there was a very large cloud service provider that provided information to a lot of different that, stored a lot of information for organizations that were out there. And and it was a ransomware attack. Who got the pain, one of the, trends that is out there right now, not only do organizations get emails, phone calls to their CEOs in the event of an incident, their clients are now getting emails, phone calls to put pressure back onto the, organization that experienced the event. So it's certainly something to be thinking about from a preventative standpoint are, what can I do to put myself in the best position? And what are their obligations to me in the event of an incident? And similarly, the other way around is, what are my obligations to them in the event of an incident on my side? So certainly something to be thinking about. And as Bill said, a lot of the contracts are very silent to it. So it might be time to start, taking a look back to those contracts.
Yeah, I think everyone's checklist got a lot longer in this session.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content, you can click through to the next video right here. Also, if you'd like to stay up to date on more videos like this, like, subscribe, and follow.